Welcome to the New Money Habits Podcast, where we talk about how to create a better plan for your money so you don't have to live paycheck to paycheck. Here are your hosts, Sarah Jones and Nino Villa.
Welcome back, Budgeteers. Coach Nino Villa here, and alongside of me, as always, Sarah Jones. And today we're going to talk about putting food on the table. The number one question we get from clients when it comes to budgeting for food is, how do I know how much I can afford to spend on food every month? Or some variation thereof, right? It's about, am I spending too much? Am I not spending enough? Although, to be honest, I don't have a whole lot of clients asking me if they don't spend enough. They're usually asking, do I spend too much? And what we find out is they're actually not spending enough on food. The plot thickens. So that's what we're going to explore today.
Love this because, Nino, this is, it's a tricky category in my opinion. And it's tricky because we have to eat, right? Most of us enjoy eating food. I guess I'm going to speak for myself. I really enjoy eating food. And I know all my clients do as well. But it's a tricky category because I think so much of the time people plan out their bills first and they kind of leave whatever's left over, right, for the grocery budget. And I think we're here to share some tips and tools and tricks and, all the good stuff on how to build a good grocery budget, how to put food on the table and feel good about doing it. And hopefully create a plan that isn't stressful, right? Because I know that grocery shopping is really stressful for a lot of people. And I hope that we can take that stress away today, or at least part of it.
Yeah, I think it comes as no surprise. I'm a big fan of plans. I just think because those plans will help you to do exactly what you just said, and that is reduce stress around an otherwise stressful category. And I think, to your point, one of the reasons why this category is so stressful is because if you're anything like I was, when I first was doing, air quote, a budget, my budget really just meant I was paying all of my very obvious bills, like my rent, my car payment, my car insurance. And then after everything got paid, I would kind of take a look at the checking account and see, okay, how much money is left to go do things like grocery shopping or even putting gas in the car, and determine, whether or not there was enough money there, or if I had to turn to a credit card that particular pay period or that particular month. There was just a lot of stress and anxiety around what should otherwise be a very basic need being met. Because it wasn't part of my actual plan. So fast forward a couple of years, flip some things on its head, and made sure that not only is putting food on the table a priority within the budget, or I'm sorry, I was going to say, not only is it part of the plan, but that it then becomes a priority almost at the top of the budget.
I love that because I'm just going to say it, that credit cards, companies like that, they don't care about us. And so, yes, while we want to make our payments on time, right, and we want to make sure that we're not defaulting and causing trouble, more important than that is that we're making sure that we're feeding ourselves, right? We're making sure that we're taking care of ourselves first. And within that, to allow that to happen, then we need to prioritize, as you said, right? Eating. We need to prioritize food, in our groceries. And I'm going to say this doesn't include, eating out. This is the grocery budget, bringing home food. Eating out in my mind is a separate category. That's not a necessity. But it really is, making ourselves come first and really putting ourselves as a priority. And I want everybody else out there to be doing that too, right? It's one of the essentials, right? When we're building our budget and creating those priorities, there are essentials in there, and food, groceries is one of those categories.
Yeah. Absolutely. So with that being said, one of the first things I want to encourage our listeners to do is when you're sitting down to make next month's budget, wherever you have food and putting food on the table, your grocery category right now, how about you move it up to closer to the top, if not the top line item? I'll tell you, on my personal budget, putting food on the table comes before keeping a roof over my head. So that means I'm going to make sure that there's enough money for our family to eat before I even pay the mortgage. Now, I'm very fortunate and blessed that those two things are never in conflict with one another. But I want to encourage our listeners, putting food on the table at the top of your next budget. And then we'll talk about how to get a number in that line item.
I love that. And actually, you know what? I was just going to look at some of my budget forms because on the forms that I use when we're putting together budgets, right, and helping people create their budgets and their plans, I believe that food is before housing as well. I was just going to look because now you've got me intrigued, Nino, in where do I have it in placement? So I was just going to look that up because I'm really curious now. I should know this, but I don't. So, but I love it that you put it above. Now, will you explain why do you put it above housing?
That's a really good question that I probably don't have a great answer to, other than it was missing from my budget for so long, and it caused so much stress and anxiety that when I started creating new money habits back in 2012, I decided I didn't want this to cause stress and anxiety anymore. I'll provide a little bit of a story, if I may, and that is before redoing our budget in 2012. Not only was it we paid all of our bills and then we looked to see if there was money left over, but since it's my wife who does the grocery shopping, she might look at the checking account, see that there was, a couple $100, $300, whatever's in there. And then she would call me and say, okay, well, how much am I allowed to spend? And she felt like she had to get permission to spend. I felt additional stress and anxiety around being the one who had to determine how much of that money could be spent, that I was like, enough is enough. So once we putting food on the table as a priority and we scheduled money for it, it was as simple as pulling that money out of the ATM, putting it in an envelope, and then allowing my wife to go and manage those funds, whichever way she felt was appropriate to feed the family. It gave her a lot of independence and autonomy in that area. It reduced my stress and anxiety in that area. And so it's not for those reasons alone that it made its way before putting or keeping a roof over our head and, therefore paying the rent or the mortgage. But that certainly had something to do with it.
Interesting. When you were telling that story, it reminded me of a time when my husband and I were in the midst of getting our debt paid off, right? And still learning our process, right? Still learning and trying to come up with something that felt good and felt sustainable. And, I don't think I made this connection until just now, but listening to you talk about that, my husband and I had this conversation, and I said, I remember very vividly, I said, I don't have money for groceries. What we had done is we had planned everything else, right? And I said, so we're going to have to eat just out of the pantry and out of the freezer. I don't have any money for groceries this week. And a few minutes later, there's a knock on the door. And Boy Scouts were coming around selling popcorn. And my husband does not say no. And he purchased, some popcorn. And Nino, it turned actually into a huge argument, right? Because I had just said we don't have money for groceries, and right, he didn't look at that as groceries. He was helping out a kid trying to, sell some stuff to go on a trip. But I remember that feeling of having the grocery budget, right? That was at the very end. That was at the very bottom of our budget and our plan at the time. And so I remember that feeling of, it was devastating, right? And what a way to make somebody feel terrible by feeling like you can't put food on your table. And, I think that thinking about that in my own journey and looking at, some of my clients and their journeys, how important this topic is today for people, and to give people the permission and the power, and to remind you that you can prioritize yourself and your needs before you prioritize other things. It really is okay to put yourself first. And not only is it okay, it really is necessary for your own mental health.
Yeah. Yeah, you just made a couple of really important points that I think we could spend quite a bit of time unpacking, but I'll just summarize for now. And I'll say, in a society that will tell you that everything and everyone else should come before you, we're telling you it's okay to put you and your family first, and putting food on the table and making sure that your family can eat. You shouldn't feel guilty about that. And so in a few minutes, we're going to talk about how to calculate a number to kind of figure out, how much can you afford to spend on food every month. But the great thing is, once you know what that number is and you pencil it in, and if it's at the top, and then the next thing is paying your rent or mortgage, and the next thing after that is being able to get to and from work, well, the things that come much, much farther down, like your Netflix account and your Disney Plus account and your Spotify account, then you can start to look at those and say, you know what, maybe those aren't as important as these other things. If things are tight and you need to cut back somewhere, why not cut back in one of those areas instead of cutting back in? It's a basic need. It's a food. Nutrition is a basic need, just like shelter and clothing are basic needs. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's so far up the budget form, is because let's do basic needs first, and then let's get into some of those other things that we want, because wants are just as important, and you're allowed to want things, and you're allowed to have the things that you want. All I ask is, please not at the expense of something that you actually need.
Right. I think that's powerful, right? That what you just said is, it's okay to have wants. But let's put this up in, we need food. I don't like to use the terms wants versus needs. I don't use that a whole lot in my life and my coaching, but you know what? Food is a need. Food is a necessity in my life, right? We all need it. It's food and water, right? I mean, those, the very basics, but, I will put into that, what I do, and with my clients as well, is that we definitely, and I just looked, and yep, food is above shelter in my budget forms. So interesting that you brought that to my attention, because I have it above housing and shelter in my budget forms as well. But I think it's still important to remember that you can be intentional and mindful with your grocery budget also. So I want to put out there, this isn't necessarily a free for all that you can spend whatever. You can still be very intentional with your spending, and very mindful of how much is necessary for you to eat the way that you feel good eating.
Yeah. I think that's going to, that's an important reminder, and that it's going to kind of show itself as we as we determine how to calculate what's the right number. But before we kind of transition into calculating the right number for you and your family, you had mentioned earlier, Sarah, that putting food on the table or the grocery category does not include eating out. And I completely agree. There's something else that it doesn't include that I think everybody should be aware of, mindful of, thinking about when they're putting together their grocery budget. And that is, although you might go and get all of these other things at the exact same place, it does not include cleaning supplies, toiletries, your grocery budget is for things that you are actually going to consume in your mouth. So while you might go and grab toilet paper and cleaning supplies when you're grocery shopping, I believe you should have a separate line item on your budget for such expenses. And this really should just be about food.
I'm going to say I do that a little bit differently, which is no surprise.
Sure.
But, and maybe this falls into that category of being, and I don't want to, I think what we said before is a little bit more advanced in our journeys, right? That in my own life, my own budget, my grocery budget does include all of that stuff. It does include food. It includes all of our cleaning supplies, all the paper, toiletries, our vitamins and supplements that we take. Our personal grocery budget does include all of those. And I'm going to say that there might have been a time where it didn't. But I feel really good about what our budget is, and we're eating the way that we want to eat. And so I feel really good about including everything together in our own personal. So I just want to throw that out there, that I think you can put them all together if you're intentional and you're mindful and you know what it is that what it is that is important to you, right? And if you guys have listened to any previous episodes, you know that grocery shopping for me particularly right now has become more challenging, being a full-time RVer. And we've been able to maintain our grocery budget through all of this. Doesn't mean it hasn't been challenging, but we have been able to maintain it and have not increased it during all of this time. So.
Yeah. And so, we, from time to time, we learn that we do things a little bit differently, and that is A-okay. I'll sit down with clients, and there are plenty who don't necessarily want to separate those two things out. I'm pretty adamant about it early on in coaching. Like when you're trying to create new money habits, when you're doing something for the first time, you're really trying to change the way you do things. I just want people to reflect on, it's not even about reflecting. It really is about, I want you to be able to go to the grocery store and buy food and not feel guilty about it, and not feel like, but this money also has to buy me these other things. Like, no, we are seriously going to go to this grocery store. We're going to get some food, and we're going to do it completely guilt-free. We're not going to stress about it. We're not going to have any anxiety about it. And we're going to feel like we're not going to be made to feel bad about it at all. And so, over time, you're absolutely right, though. Like, depending on how well disciplined you are in certain things, that is perfectly A-okay.
I think there's some tips and tools, especially if you're working with a coach, I think they can help you bring in some tools to use, right? That can help you to figure out how to spend guilt-free, right? How to include some of these things. Big warehouse shopping is a big one, right? And that's a common concern for a lot of my clients, is Sarah, but we don't necessarily go every month. So I think, there are ways to make this very personal to your own situation, you know, and if you guys have listened, you know that there's not a one size fits all. But just keep in mind that I love what Nino said there, that you shouldn't feel guilty going to the grocery store at all. And if your budget, I believe that if your budget is done in a way that is appropriate for you and you've taken the time, that it will eliminate that guilt, which is what we want.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So I would imagine everybody's wondering, okay, so how do I know how much to budget for food? And so, Sarah, I know you and I want to explore a couple of different ways that you can start to identify how much money you should be spending on food each month. I will, right from the top, I will tell you that we don't believe in percentages. You know, a lot of gurus out there will tell you, you know, spend no more than 10% of your take-home pay. Here's the problem with that. Imagine if I make $10,000 a month and 10% of that is $1,000. And if I'm a single person, $1,000 for food is quite different than if I'm a family of 8 and we have $1,000 for food. It either means that the single person is spending far too much money on food every month, or that the family of 8 is not spending nearly enough money on food every month. So we're going to throw percentages right out the window, right from the get-go. I don't think they work. We have a better way.
Yes. No to percentages. Let's not.
Let's not and say we didn't. So how might we go about figuring out how much we should spend on food every month? Well, I think, Sarah, you and I agree that one of the first ways that you can kind of get a sense of what might be appropriate is by looking back a little bit, maybe going back a couple of months, 2-3 months, and looking at how much have you been spending on average each month on food. And that'll at least give you a starting point as to, okay, well, what has it been?
Yeah, and I think that's a great starting spot, because you can look at what you've been doing already, right? So a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know how much I'm spending. Well, let's figure it out. It's easy to figure out. You can go back through your bank statements, your credit card, statements, however you've paid for groceries in the past. Go back through and do a really quick, in my opinion, it doesn't have to be, this crazy, let's break it down, by store. I usually have clients go back through 3 to 4 months is generally what I recommend. Go back through 3 or 4, add it all up, divide by however many months, so if you went back 4 months, add up the totals, divide by 4, that's your average, right? Let's just get an average, because you're going to have some months that you've spent more, some months that you've spent less. Maybe there was a birthday or a celebration in there. Maybe there was a holiday, family gathering. Those things are going to happen in the future as well. So let's not go crazy with it. Let's just take a few minutes, add it all up, divide by the number of months that you picked, and there's your starting point.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. What I love about it's your starting point is it's going to bring you to a moment of reflection. And that moment of reflection, you're going to be able to start to feel or you're going to be able to kind of identify and discern how you feel about that number. Are you surprised in a way that you're like, wow, I can't believe I'm spending that much? Or are you surprised, like, wow, I can't believe I've been able to make it happen on, that little? Or you'll just be able to kind of reflect on how you're feeling about that number. Is it too high? Is it too low? Is it just right? But it brings you to that reflection moment.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. Right. And I think, Nino, most of us know when we're going to the grocery store, what some of our shopping habits are, right? And we can tell when we come up with that starting point, and I'm very firm on that starting point number, because most of the time we make some adjustments with that. Right. You said it in the beginning. Sometimes people simply aren't spending enough. Sometimes, with being mindlessly spending at the store, right? Sometimes that is an area that we can make adjustments in. And I don't like to say cut back, but we can make adjustments there to become more in alignment with what you're trying to accomplish. Right. And so, I think it's just important to, not beat yourself up, use it as information and say, okay, what have I done? What did I do those months? Right? Look back. Was I going without a list? Was I running in and you had brought this up when we were talking beforehand. How many times a month are you going to the grocery store? How many times a week are you going? Right? And so when you're talking about building new habits, you have to evaluate and reflect on all of it, not just the dollars that you're spending, but your habits that go along with all of that spending.
Yeah, we're definitely going to peel back and look a little bit closer at some of the things you just said about asking yourself how often you're going to the grocery store. But I also, are you going to the grocery store with a plan in mind? Do you kind of have a menu? Do you know what you're shopping for, or is it a little bit more impulsive? But you just brought it up. I think another way, if getting back into your bank statements for the past 2, 3, 4 months isn't a possibility, let's say you're somebody who already pays cash for groceries. Well, then, as Sarah just kind of alluded to, you can still reflect on what you've been doing by asking yourself a series of very simple questions. The first question is, how often do you go to the grocery store? So what's that frequency? Is it once a week? Is it multiple times throughout the week? Is it once every other week? What is that frequency? And then start to ask yourself, on average, we know that you're going to spend differently almost every time you go, but on average, is it between $80 and $120? Is it between $150 and $200? On average, how much are you spending each time you go? And so once you have that information, you can do some quick arithmetic and figure out, if I'm going once a week and I typically spend about $150, now you know that you've been spending on average $600 a month for food. And so that's just another way that you can kind of get to that starting point and have that reflective moment.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And, I think that so much of the time, it's not something that we've done. I know I certainly didn't do it. I did try to go to the store once a week, but I wasn't mindful about anything else, right? I was mindful about, okay, let me go once a week because, I have to get groceries this week. But I think, Nino, what all of this is doing is it's just helping us be more aware of our habits and what we are doing, right? Because so much of this, they're habits that we've built that we don't think about anymore, which is what a lot of times what a habit is, right? It's built in. So use this time to, as you say, reflect, right? What have you been doing? I love it because I think it's just been something that we do mindlessly. And I'm saying that a lot just to bring awareness to it. Because especially in this category, we have to feed our family. We go to the grocery store, but it's not something that we think about too in depth.
Yeah. Very good point. It makes me think that as you use the word mindlessly, as we're doing this mindlessly, make me remember that part of the change that I saw in my own budget and financial situation. And then something I use with clients very often is, okay, so now that we have, like, we're kind of reflecting on this, we're making it a priority, we're doing things differently from that perspective, then what are some of the other habits that could support you in budgeting well and managing your money well in this particular category? And it's things like meal planning, not necessarily meal prepping, but meal planning. At least thinking to yourself, okay, for the next week, what are some of the dinners that we want to make? You know, if you got kids, what are the kids' lunches? And you're just thinking through, what is it that I want to, make this particular week? Because by meal planning, you can come up with a menu, and now that menu becomes a guide for what you're going to be shopping for. My wife and I were just having this conversation the other day where she was like, you know what, I think I want to start buying chicken in bulk. Excuse me. She's like, because there's a number of different crock pot recipes that I like. And so I can kind of prep those on Sunday, and then we can do different things throughout the week. But all of that information, that entire exercise is preparing her for grocery shopping for the week.
I love that. And I would say out of a lot of things that I work through with clients, the meal planning and grocery shopping and how to feel good about our grocery budget. This is a category that we oftentimes spend a lot of time on because it feels very overwhelming for people. And so if you're out there listening, you're thinking, okay, this is overwhelming. I don't know what to make my family. We don't like the same things. And we've got a lot of late night games. There's a lot of this and that and the other. Here's what I would say. Slow down. Slow down just a little bit with it and take it just piece by piece. And what I did when my kids were little, I used to ask my kids, what's one meal you want this week? One meal. I allowed them to pick one meal that they wanted during the week. More often than not, I would make it because, I asked them. But my kids weren't super picky, but let's just face it, Nino. It's no fun having kids that are complaining that they don't want to eat that when you're sitting down to eat supper, right? And you're at the table and the kids are complaining because they don't like whatever you made. And so I told the kids, you know what? Pick one meal this week. One meal, and that way you're at least happy one time with what's put in front of you. And that made my life a lot easier, quite honestly, and it got them involved, so I wasn't the one solely responsible for it. And I actually have a whole big resource that I send out to clients, when we're going through this. But another quick tip I'm just going to share with you guys is, as you're thinking through the week of something that sounds good, and maybe you don't have the stuff, in your pantry to make it already, I always keep a list and write down one thing a day. One item a day, one meal a day that sounds good. So the next time that you're putting together your menu, for the following week, you've already got a whole list of things that sound really good, right? And so you're not having to take time to say, okay, what do I want to make this week? You've written something down every day. And that's just, it eliminates some of the stress, right? And you're preparing yourself like, okay, now you can start putting it on your grocery list. What are the things that I'm going to need to make it? What don't I have in my pantry? Right. And so you start putting it down and you're doing it in little bits and pieces. And so it's not trying to tackle the whole project at once, right? Break it down into littler pieces. So you're not climbing the mountain all in one day.
That's right. You make a good point that it can seem a little daunting, overwhelming. There's so much to do in trying to figure out what the number is and how to budget properly. But you make such a good point. Just slow down. It's just one thing at a time. The great thing about the grocery budget is unlike something like your electric bill, or maybe more appropriate, let's say your car payment. Your car payment doesn't change. It's the same every single month. Your electric bill, I mean, it changes during the different seasons, but it's pretty predictable. Sometimes groceries feels like it's all over the place. And I think once you kind of get into a cadence, you're going to figure out real quick, am I budgeting enough? Am I budgeting too much? One of the things I will tell you too, just as a sidebar, and obviously this is for our listeners, is when I sit down with a client and we establish the food budget to start, if we think that it's too much by the time we meet the next, the next pay period, or even a month down the road, if we feel like it's too much, I always encourage them, okay, let's keep the surplus, the amount of grocery money you haven't spent yet, in the envelope, and let's still take out what we budgeted for, because you're going to want to go about 3 months. 3 months will give you a really good sense of whether or not you've budgeted properly, or if you're under budgeting or over budgeting. So I wouldn't make any significant changes for the first 3 months, but after that, you can change it, and you can, with all the inflation that we've experienced over the last 8 months, our grocery line item on our budget is not the same today as it was, November of 2021.
And I love that, just to remind people that it does take several months of, kind of getting in the swing of this, right? Before you make any major adjustments. So allow yourself that time to start developing the new habits, to start being more mindful with it, and to really take that time to evaluate, right? Before you make any major adjustments, before you come down on yourself, go those extra months. And that also allows you to say, okay, this is what I've been doing, right? And this is what I did this month that was really helpful. So I'm going to write that down so I can continue that on, right? I found a new grocery store, right? And some of the stuff that I can get from there is it's going to save me a lot of money, right? Because their prices are better on, maybe it's meat. I'm just going to say that. Maybe you found a place that's got a deal on meat. And so you choose to, maybe you buy in bulk, right? So maybe you choose to do that because it's a little bit cheaper. And then you can use, some of that surplus, right, later on to kind of be saving up for the next big bulk order there. I think it's about just recognizing that you can incorporate new habits over time. It doesn't have to be right away, and it's going to take you several months to get used to doing it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something you said in there that sparked something, and I'm losing it. A quick tangent. I will tell you, if you're somebody like me who you find yourself forgetting things a lot, and you're like, man, I had this thought and I forgot it. Can I encourage you for a moment? It just means you're a really good listener. It's because you were actually listening. You weren't listening to respond or holding a thought in your head to wait your turn. It's because you were actually listening, and then the thought just kind of moved on. So that's what happened here. I was listening. I had a thought. I lost it. Maybe it'll come back to me. Who knows?
It will. It will.
Yeah. In the meantime, let's kind of summarize quickly and then kind of move into so how do I really know how much to spend? So we've talked about reflecting, going back 2, 3, 4 months into your bank statements, your credit card statements, if that's how you pay for groceries, to kind of get a sense of what your average spend each month is, or just thinking through how often do you go to the grocery store, when you go, how much are you typically spending? That is another way that you can kind of get a monthly average to at least get a starting point. And then we said that leads to a moment of reflection where you can kind of determine for yourself, do you feel like it's too much, not enough, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But if you're really wondering, how much can I afford to spend? I told you from the top, I don't like percentages. I would say I would not encourage you to spend more than 15 to 20% of your take-home pay if you're on a, if your income's kind of tight. You don't want to be spending an enormous amount of your take-home pay on food. But more important than that, because I don't like the percentages, is I think there are some guidelines, or this is a guideline that I know here at New Money Habits we kind of teach to our clients, and that is, I'll give you my own personal experience. So right now, we budget $550 a month for food. It's a really odd number, so let's just round it up to $600 for just a moment. We're a family of 4. If you take $600, you divide it by 4, you get $150. And so one of the things that we teach is coming up with a number per person for your household and then applying that number accordingly. So if it's 150, which I'll admit with all the inflation is a little bit tighter, we should probably be reevaluating and coming up with a new number. Probably should be closer to $200 per person. But for a family of 4, that would mean budgeting $800 a month for food instead of $600, which is what we currently do. But I love to at least explore this with my clients and say, let's take a number, whether it's 150, whether it's 200, whether it's 250, let's take a number and then let's multiply it by your family members. And then let's stare at that number and see how we feel about it. If we think it's too much, not enough, or just right.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I was just kind of doing my own, figures in my own head. We're about at that same amount per person. Now there are just 2 of us now. And again, I include everything in our grocery budget, but I know approximately how much I spend on those other things. So we're at about the $200 per person for groceries here. And so I think that's a pretty good average, Nino. I like that. It's a good way, again, kind of that starting point, right?
Right. It's not an exact science by, any stretch, but it is just a good starting guideline. It's just a guideline, Mm-hmm. As you were saying that you only have 2 and you're still at about that average, I'm also thinking about the ages of my 2 children. And right now, mm-hmm. they're just before that, like, they're starting to eat us out of house and home. They haven't fully taken on that role yet, but at 12 and 8, I'm staring down the barrel of I'm going to have to adjust the food budget according to just how much the kids are consuming. And they're incredibly active too, right? So with all of that activity comes kind of the need for, not just more food, but specific types of food. More mm-hmm. for us, it would be like chicken and, lentils for protein or whatever, so being mindful of, it's not an exact science, but it's a good starting guideline to help determine based on family size, what might be appropriate.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. And I was just going back through, our grocery budget has basically doubled over the past year and a half. Because before we moved and, embarked on this journey, we did have both of the kids living at home as well, right? And they were both adults. When you put a 21-year-old boy in a home, let me tell you, the amount of food that's consumed then. And actually my daughter, if she hears this, she would absolutely kill me if she knew I was saying this, but she ate probably just as much as my son did, so, don't be fooled. Girls eat a fair amount of food too, right? But she was very active as well. And so, but going back to your point of reevaluating, right? Our grocery budget per month hasn't changed. It stayed the same, but our family members have changed, right? Our household size has changed. So effectively, our budget has doubled per person over the last year and a half. So that's a great reminder that you can adjust your budget as necessary. Your kids do get older. Your dietary needs change. You know, what you need at one point is going to be different than what you're going to need in a couple of months, right? And so give yourself some breathing room in there, right? And flexibility in that budget to make adjustments as you feel necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. The great thing about a budget is from month to month, not so much within the month, although I guess I will never say never. But the point I was going to make is from month to month, your budget can change. Actually, from month to month, your budget should change. There are variable expenses like electricity where it's not exactly the same every single month. And while you're kind of working your way through finding what the right amount of money to budget for food is, like I said, I would encourage you to try to stick to something for 3 months just to kind of see, like, is that, doable, and then making adjustments after that. But you had also mentioned earlier, one of the things that I always like, August is the time of the year that when I meet with my clients in August, it's that time of the year that I remind them, like, hey, so the holidays are coming, which means like there's Thanksgiving, there's food involved, there's Christmas, there's food involved, there's Halloween. So there's all of this stuff where whether it's a separate line item or it's looking at the grocery line item itself, we usually have to allocate some dollars for that stuff. So whether it's we're going to adjust the grocery bill around Thanksgiving up by $100 because we want to make sure we can get pies and dressing and this and that. Did I just call stuffing dressing? What is wrong with me? Oh my goodness. My family would take me out back and beat me if they knew I just called stuffing dressing. I don't even know where that came from.
I was going to say, what part of the country are you in now?
Right. What happened? But so it goes back to the point that your grocery bill, or I'm sorry, your grocery budget can change from month to month, because when you're in the month of November, you should be planning for extra food expenses, whether that's in your grocery budget line, or maybe you just have a separate line item that's like Thanksgiving, and this is how much I'm going to allocate towards that. But it definitely can change.
Yes, that's a good point and a good reminder that, and even we've got 4th of July coming up, right? A lot of people do big celebrations on the 4th of July. So now is a good time you need to be thinking about that, right? How do you need to make an adjustment to account for the possibility of having a higher food bill for a month, or, your kids are home, school's out, right? So very likely during the summer, your grocery budget might change because your kids are home versus when they're in school. Right. And so it's just, I think, looking ahead, looking at your calendar, that's another way to alleviate some of the stress, is allow yourself that opportunity to look ahead so you can plan more effectively. What's coming up? What do you need to be prepared for? Yeah.
All right. Well, there's something I've been holding back on. So if you're still listening, you are in luck. If you have been listening to the episode and you're like, yes, I need to be thinking about my food budget a little bit more closely, I want to do some of the things that Sarah and Nino have been talking about, I want to look back, I want to reflect, and I want to come up with a number, and I want to put that number closer to the top of my budget for next month, we have a tool for you. If you make your way to newmoneyhabits.com and you click the helpful tools link, you're going to see a food calculator. That's right. We have a cool little calculator to help you determine after you've done all that reflection, you can still kind of use the calculator to help you determine what your monthly food budget should be. So I want to make sure that all of our listeners know that that tool is available. And yeah.
And I think if, use these tools, guys, because even if it's not something that you use every month, right? You start to build up I like to call them my toolbox, right? You start to build up your toolbox, and maybe your kids are getting ready to move out on their own. So you can now provide them with tools, right? To help them kind of get started on their journey. Maybe you're just getting started on your journey. And so use these tools that are available for free, right? And start incorporating them into your life. So, Nino, I love it that these tools are provided for everybody to use and to start bringing into their own lives, their own plans, to help take away some of this stress that can be associated with money.
Yeah. All right. And before we completely wrap up, I do have I'm curious, Sarah, whether or not, for anybody who might be listening who's dying to know, does putting food on the table, does the grocery budget include some of these newfangled prepared meals delivery boxes to your door?
That's a good question. And I do include it.
Yeah. Yep. As do I. So if you were listening and you're thinking to yourself, okay, but we have one of these, and since we're not sponsored by any of them, I won't name names, but any of these really cool meal delivery services, mm-hmm. Yeah, that can certainly be part of your putting food on the table grocery budget. And you can use all of the same things that we've been talking about to kind of determine whether or not what you're spending on such a meal plan is conducive to your budget.
Absolutely. And, I think for a lot of people, they do help, especially right in this crazy time that we're living when life is busy. Again, I think that those are another tool. And I've got a lot of clients who are like, oh, well, we could, we don't have. This goes back to, what do you feel comfortable? Does it help reduce some of the stress in your life? Then yes, if you're busy and you know that you've got a meal at home that your family can prepare, you can, when you get off work and it's just there. I say, as long as you're accounting for it and you're planning, right? It's included in your plan. Go for it.
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, another great time spent with you, Sarah, talking about something very, very practical and real. We all have to feed ourselves. As we said, it is a basic need, and we shouldn't have to feel guilty about meeting that basic need. So if we just plan for it appropriately, we put it in the right priority, then we can go and put food on the table without feeling an ounce of guilt for doing so.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Thanks, Nino, for always bringing a new perspective, a different perspective, and the tools, because I always take notes and I always walk away with, more tools in my toolbox. So thank you.
Of course. And thank you for spending the time with me. Listeners as well, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will continue the conversation next time.
Thank you for listening to the New Money Habits podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Keeping Up with the Joneses Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our host by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes. Join our growing group of like-minded people on Facebook and follow us on your favorite platform. Music provided by Summer School.